Hi guys, it's Matt from Maxon UK here, and in this tutorial we are going to be looking at the free Cinema 4D plugin called HOT4D. Okay, if you want to pop off and download that plugin in order to follow that tutorial, the link is going to be in the blog. Okay, once you guys have done that, then come back and join me. For those people who have managed it, then here we go. So HOT4D is an incredibly good little free plugin that allows us to create realistic looking water. So I'm just going to create that there. Now HOT4D is a deformer, so like all of the other deformers it requires something to deform. So I'm just going to go and create myself a plane. Okay, and I'm just going to adjust my camera a bit and drag and drop my HOT4D plugin into my plane. And you can see instantly that we get some form of deformation here. Okay, I'm just going to increase the size of this to say something like, oh, not meters, 1,000 by 1,000, and you can see that we get a better sized plane there. It's a bit blocky due to the number of segments, so I'm just going to increase that a bit as well. So 500, say, by 500, and there you go. You can see that we've got this wonderful sort of moon terrain at the moment that will be water eventually. Now, if I press play, at the moment nothing happens because we need to animate HOT4D in the timeline. So I'm just going to increase the number of seconds that I've got here to say 500 frames. It just gives me a little bit more playing room. And then go to HOT4D, and here we have the time function. Okay, so I'm just going to create a keyframe there, so at 0. And then at the end of my animation, I'm going to increase the amount of time. And if you just see that you scale up, you can see that it starts to change and starts to move its way. And basically it's the speed it wants to get through the animation. I find that using 50 is okay. And if I keyframe that, go back to the beginning, press play, okay, you can see that it starts to go. Now, it speeds up. It starts off slow and speeds up, and then will eventually slow down as it gets towards the end because of Cinema 4D's sort of ease in and ease out attribute. So I'm just going to go to my window, bring up my timeline, and I've got my keyframe selected already because I've got that down there, and I'm just going to click the linear button. What that means now is that the interpolation between those frames is constant, so there's no speeding up and slowing down, and we get a decent speed when it comes to the movement of my waves. Okay, so you can see that that's not too bad, like sort of straight out of the box, as it were. So I can adjust a whole load of different settings. So the resolution, for example, will just sort of increase the amount that there are. If you went crazy and you did 16 by 16, you can see that we've got sort of 8-bit water, which is fine for anybody who wants to kind of do low poly models or low poly Cs, and 256 isn't too bad. If I whack it straight up, you will find that, yeah, there we go, Cinema 4D sort of basically grinds to a halt because the resolution is too high for it to process. So in order for us to work with this tutorial, I'm going to stick with 256. Okay, and then you can increase or decrease the ocean size. So if I really shrink it, you can see that it starts to repeat a little bit too much. So increasing the size a little bit so that we get maybe a little bit of repetition, but not too much. It's not too bad. You can change the wind speed, so the lower is, far choppier, and then if you really want it to be a nice sort of slow moving sea, increase it and it pretty much flattens out. Okay, so there we go, somewhere in between there is where I want to be. The wind direction is done in degrees. So at the moment it's facing away from me. I think I want the sea to come towards me, so I'm just going to adjust it 270. There we go. I mean, I could turn the camera or rotate, but you've got sort of control as to which direction it goes. So I'm just going to undo that. Okay. Ooh, and go back down to there. Undid too far. You can increase or decrease the wave height, so like you'd expect to find sort of like giant rolling waves or more sort of gentle rolling sea, which is what I'm going to go for. Shortest wave, sort of like you can see, remove some of the detail later on or like during the process. Okay, choppiness you can change and adapt. So if you increase that choppiness, you can see that the waves sort of become sharper, like they're being pushed a little bit more. But you do have to be a bit careful with that one, because if you overdo it, it deforms the plane so much that it overlaps and clips itself. So there's a sort of fine line between getting that choppiness and polygon failure. Okay, and it's sort of giving you a nice sort of rolling wave with it at the moment. It just kind of keeps repeating and it's washing its way. You can choose its damp reflection. So this is how much it sort of reflects off each other, how much the waves cause more waves off each other. So this is great if you want like a middle of the ocean or, you know, not a lot going on. And then you can lower the amount that the wind has any effect as well. So if you increase the wind speed so that it's always going in that direction and increase that a little bit further, you can see that it's manipulating the waves so that they're still coming in sort of my direction, but they are sort of swirling a little bit more than they were earlier. Okay, and then you can adjust the ocean depth, and if you really shrink it down, it'll act like the waves are not as, you know, sort of got much water or much swell underneath them and it hasn't got that much to do. Or if you really increase it back, you know, you can find that it really is sort of like swells the waves around. I'm just going to undo that. So we get this nice up and downy sort of wave here. Okay. So it's not looking too bad. And then I'm going to add me a texture. Okay. Because at the moment, if you render, it's obviously just this grey mountain sort of side. So just to create yourself a new texture, double click, okay, and create yourself the material editor. Now under the colour, what we're going to be creating, okay, under the textures is a Fresnel. Okay, so if I just click that, it's a gradient type thing, but it works out the gradient depending on where you're looking and how close edges are to things. And at the moment we just get this black to white, which isn't, you know, what we're going to be wanting for this. So I'm going to adjust the colours, okay, and so this is the darker end of the spectrum, and I'm going to choose a nice dark blue. Okay, so I want sort of like a deep ocean blue, which is good for me. And then the lighter areas, sort of where it starts to highlight, so not quite so light, but not quite so dark. Okay, sort of midway. Oop. Helps if you don't press cancel. Okay, and okay, it's not too bad, but I might just increase the lightness of that a little bit. There we go. Okay, it just gives you that nice gradient. Okay, now under the reflectance tab, we've got it specular, and at the moment it's very broad and not very shiny. So we're going to need to adjust that over here with its width. So I'm going to bring its width down because water has, you know, quite sharp highlights, but they're quite bright, which at the moment we haven't got with the specular strength. So just whacking that up, we've got quite a nice shiny surface there. Okay, but water is also reflective. So I'm going to add a reflection layer, and in this instance I'm going to use a Beckman. Okay, now clicking on that, obviously it's a bit much. Okay, but scrolling down, okay, I'm going to use a layer Fresnel, okay, that's used, that's sort of integrated into this reflectance channel. Okay, and what I'm going to do, change it to dielectric, and then under preset custom there is already a water reflection, so it'll work out a more sort of useful reflection based on water settings that it's already got as part of its programming. Under the roughness here you can increase that a little bit. I mean, you can increase it a lot and you can see that it really goes a little bit crazy. But just a little bit of roughness will just give us that little bit more texture to the water without having to use a bump map or extra things. Okay, so now if I just apply that, okay, you can see that with R18 that I'm using at the moment, my viewport's designed to sort of start replicating those sorts of things, which isn't too bad. And if I render, okay, it's got not too bad a texture. It's very interesting, very blue. Something that would help here, I think, is some form of lighting. So if I just create myself a physical sky and render again, there we go. That gives us a much more realistic look. It gives the reflections and the specular something to actually do, because you've got these reflections and highlights and stuff. And if you just move around your camera, you can sort of find the best angle that perhaps you want to work. If you want that sort of nice sunset look, you can go that way. Okay, and you can see that it renders relatively fast as well. You're obviously able to adjust some of these settings, so maybe I want to bring some of that specular down. Okay, so it's not quite as wide. Okay, yeah, that's not too bad. Cool. So we've got some decent sort of looking waves here, and we've got a nice realistic looking feel to how it's kind of creating. We get these highlights and all of these wonderful sort of ripples and this strong current, okay, which is exactly the sort of thing I wanted to sort of put together and kind of show you what this plugin can do. Now, this plugin has another really good sort of feature to it, which is that we can create foam around the tops and the peaks of these waves. If I was to kind of, just close this, if I was to really sort of make it choppier and make the waves like taller and things, we can, you know, like you'd expect if you've got a really rough sea, okay, we can start to create foam that will give that wonderful sort of wash effect all the way around, okay? And to do that, I am going to need to make my plane editable, okay? So I'm just going to pause it, just go back to the beginning, make sure where I am. Now, for reference, I always copy and paste. I always make a second, just so that I've always got something to go back to. You can obviously save your work a lot, and I'm just going to hide that one. And then I'm going to edit this one, okay? So I'm going to go over and make my plane editable, because I'm going to need to access a vertex map, okay? And to do that, I need the geometry to be editable. So going to points mode, you can see that the deformer no longer has an effect, and I just have a flat plane. With my plane selected, I'm going to go up to select, and I'm going to set a vertex weight, okay? You can leave the settings as they are and click OK. Now it's created this vertex map tag here, which I'm going to rename so that I don't get confused a bit later on, and I'm going to call it Jacob. Okay, it's a mathematical thing, it's not just a random name. And then I'm going to have my plane selected again, and I'm going to select, and I'm going to create a second vertex map. Okay, and click OK. This one I'm going to call foam, because that's what we're going to use it for. Now, if I go to the HOT4D deformer and scroll down the bottom, we have areas where we can put these vertex maps. So the first one, which is Jacob, I'm going to put in the J-, which is the Jacob threshold. And then down the bottom, I'm going to put the last one, which was foam, okay, which I don't think I renamed properly. I did it to the plane instead. Whoops. Let's call that one foam. Okay. Let's rename that C while I'm at it. And then under the HOT4D plugin, you can see that I have Jacob and foam. Now what this does is this actually calculates where those sort of peaks and troughs are in order to calculate where to put that foam. And at the moment it's a little bit bright, okay? So you can adjust these settings down here, which is the Jacob threshold and the foam threshold, okay? And you should be able to notice, if I go back to the beginning and press play, I find that it takes a little bit of a time to refresh. You also need to make sure that you put the do Jacobian tag in. Otherwise, none of it's going to work. Okay, go back to the beginning. There we go. You can see that we've got this sort of foam map here that starts to work its way out. And if I press play, these little white lines are where it's going to create that foam for me. So if I just decrease the foam threshold, so that's where it creates the foam. The Jacob threshold is how long that foam stays on for. So if you wanted really quick disappearing foam, then that's what you could use. You could make it really high there. Or if you want it to linger a little bit more, lower that threshold. And you can wash it out completely if you wanted, and we get a very foamy, very rough sea. So I'm just going to increase that again to about, say, 0.5. Okay, and it starts to create these nice little entities moving around. Okay, I might lower that a little bit more again, just so we get that feel. Okay, cool. You can see that Cinema 4D does start to lag, so there's going to be a point where I'm going to have to use the picture viewer to render in order to see what's going on. Now, if I render, you can see that nothing has changed as yet. And that's because we haven't been able to apply any form of texture to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my texture, okay, that I've created. And under the luminance channel, I'm going to add a special effect. So ensuring that my luminance channel is ticked, okay, under the texture tag, if I scroll down, under the effects, we have a vertex map. And that means that we can use the vertex maps that's being created and apply a luminance channel through it. So if I just tick that vertex map and then double click the channel, you can see it's asking me for the vertex map that it wants to use. So if I just drag and drop my vertex tag, the foam one, not the Jacob one, definitely the foam this time, okay, and I tick that in, then what should happen when I come out, you can see that we get this foam texture instantly added to our water. Okay, if I just click render, okay, it's not too bad. So if I just go back to the beginning and if I do a play, okay, there we go. Just needed a refresh. Now you can see that it adds this really nice foam to the top of these, and it just gives that more realistic detail for something that you do or do not know, that gives you those peaks to really replicate rough seas. And that's all changeable, so if you go back into HOT4D and you press play, you can lower that foam threshold or increase that foam threshold, and it will do it roughly in real time, and you get that really choppy sea. And if you want to do it only with the sort of like the peaks and the real high peaks, then you can adjust that, and you can see it happening. It's a really nice sort of look to give you a really basic, really sort of quick, without using an awful lot outside of the basic settings here. Okay, so if I just press render, okay, you can see that we've got all of these nice sort of looking reflections, you know, around here, and these nice sort of white troughs. If you find that that's too white, which I sometimes do, if you go back into your luminance channel and change it from mix mode to multiply, okay, you can just bring down the brightness. Okay, you might want to choose a blue just so that you're working with a bluish colour, and then render. It just takes that sort of, I suppose I would call it glare off a little bit, so that it's not too much, okay, going around sort of like the peaks. You might find that on the version that you can see with me, that it starts to look a little bit square, okay, and this is because the resolution and the amount of polygons that are I made when I made this original plane. The higher resolution, the more segments you have, the better the sort of resolution vertex map it will create. but the slower Cinema 4D will get. So if you're aware of the settings that you are thinking are going to work, but you want a more realistic looking C, then you're going to need to obviously practice first and then apply it to a much bigger, much larger segmented plane than perhaps I've done for this tutorial. Okay, so I might just, sort of play around some of the settings. You can see what you want to work and we can see how it's going to look. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this doing a little preview render, and then you guys can see what it's like at the end. Okay, right, see you in a sec. Okay, so there we go. We've got our render here, and if I just press play, you can see what we've got. There we go. Now you can see it's got some really lovely, realistic looking movement there from the wave generator. Having looked at it, I think perhaps some of the foam is a little bit much, so if I was to redo it, then I think I would probably just fix that. But you get the idea that you can do some really quick and powerful water simulations with this, and everything is configurable depending on how much you want to have it foamy, how much you want to have it choppy, the look of the textures and things like that. But I'm hoping that you find in this tutorial that it gives you the starting point necessary to be able to play with this and get some really incredible and powerful effects. Okay, well, I hope that was a useful tutorial for you, and I will catch you next time. Bye.